While our speakers are getting settled, I'll mention that moderating tonight is Glory Edim, author, activist, and the founder of Well-Read Black Girl, a nationwide book club turned literary festival that celebrates the uniqueness of Black literature and sisterhood. Well-Read Black Girl's mission is to use literature and storytelling as a tool for advocacy and collective empowerment. The annual literary festival, which recently wrapped up, aims to transform the publishing industry by increasing the public visibility of Black women and non-binary authors. Glory has won numerous awards for her work, supporting and sustaining literature, including the 2017 Innovators Award from the Los Angeles Times Book Prizes and the Madam C.J. Walker Award from the Hurston Wright Foundation. She also serves on the board of New York City's Housing Works bookstore. Her best-selling anthology, Well-Read Black Girl, Finding Our Stories, Discovering Ourselves, was published by Penguin Random House in 2018. She's currently working on a memoir that explores her intimate relationship with reading and Nigerian American heritage. She's a proud alumni of Howard University and currently resides in Los Angeles. You can find copies of all of their titles at the Café con Libros website, whose link I'll be periodically sprinkling throughout the chat. Kevin, Robin, Glory, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'll now turn things over to Glory.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here with two brilliant poets. Hello, Kevin. Hi, Robin. How are you doing today?
Great.
I'm gonna kick things off with reading your bios and getting everyone familiar. Robin Coste Lewis is the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles and writer in residence at the University of Southern California. Her poetry debut, Voyage of the Sable Venus, was honored with the 2015 National Book Award for Poetry, the first poetry debut to do so since 1975, and the first debut to win in poetry by an African American. Lewis is a Cave Canem Fellow, a Fellow of the Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities, and a Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow. She received her MFA in poetry from NYU. She's also a finalist for the Rita Dove Poetry Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Review, the Hurston Wright Award, as well as the International War Poetry Prize. Lewis has published her work widely in various journals and anthologies, including The New Yorker, the Paris Review, and the New York Times, among others. She has taught at Hunter College, New Hampshire College, and the NYU Low Residency MFA in Paris. Currently, she is the writer in residency at the University of Southern California. Born in Compton, California, her family is from New Orleans. So now I will read Kevin's bio, which has some new wonderful additions to it. Kevin Young is the National Museum of African American History and Culture Director. This is an awesome new addition. Congratulations, Kevin. He is also the director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the poetry editor for The New Yorker. He is the author of 12 books of poetry and prose, including Blue Laws, Selected and Uncollected Poems, 1995 to 2015, longlisted for the National Book Award, and the Book of Hours, winner of the Marshall Prize from the Academy of American Poets. Young's book, Bunk, The Rise of Hoaxes, Humbug, Plagiarists, Phonies, Postfacts, and Fake News, was a New York Times notable book and was longlisted for the National Book Award and appeared on many best of lists for 2017. His nonfiction book, The Gray Album, on the Blackness of Blackness, won the Graywolf Press Nonfiction Prize and the PEN Open Book Award, and was a New York Times notable book and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism. He is the editor of 8 other collections and was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016. So both amazing bios. And I'm going to start things off just acknowledging the fact today is Veterans Day, and there's so many Black vets that we need to acknowledge and understand their gift to us. I think that there's so much to be said about Black vets that is not acknowledged. And as I was preparing for this, I came across 2 incredible poems by Robin that I would love for her to share just to open up the conversation. If you're reading along with us and you have your book here, Robin, you know what? Which poem would you like to do? Poem, Beauty's Nest, or From or Into? Do you have a preference?
No, do you?
I love both of them. I love both of them. Maybe we can do from two.
I think I'll read. Okay,
Good.
sure. I was gonna say Beauty's Nest. That's hilarious. Okay,
Oh,
anyway.
okay, do Beauty's Nest then. We can do that.
Do them both.
From to. At last, a dark, murderous lunatic to whom they are allowed to respond. Here, no one expects them to be strung up by their necks, dangled, and then left to be cut down from a tall tree and not cry. No law here will require them to watch their families hurled on top of the world's bright pyre over generations without complaint, unattended by rage's holiness or the clear mirror of grief. They find some chalk to celebrate, while one loads, one lifts, then checks. Just before they ignite the bomb, they write on its shell, from Harlem to Hitler, then stand back for the camera, smiling. I think I will read Beauty's Nest too because they're holding hands. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they showed up at the same time in my book. So Beauty's Nest has a subtitle, and it's Jim Crow welcomes you home after the war, just after midnight, Grand Canyon, 1951. And maybe we could talk about this later, but it's both of these poems, I wrote them because my father was a World War II vet. My grandfather was a World War I vet. My brother was a Korean War vet. I mean, it's just, it goes on and on. So Beauty's Nest. Beauty's Nest renders the body mute, an elegance so inconceivable, it's violent, extreme. It hurts the heart to see something so vast and deep can also be made of dirt. And if it can be of the earth, the body ponders, might such a landscape exist also within me? The four of you stand silent, uniformed on its rim, while the imagination tries to conceive all the things it is still too dark to see. You jump back into your wide tan Ford and begin to drive again, past all the motels and their signs, which, were it not just after midnight, you know and could see, say, whites only.
Thank you. That is absolutely beautiful. Like so many of the poems in this book, just stunning. But I did in fact realize that your family has a lineage of, serving in war and being, as I said before, less acknowledged in a lot of ways. There's little to be done to acknowledge the thousands of Black veterans in the United States who were abused, attacked, even killed because of their status as military veterans. And the fact that for over a century, instead of being treated as honored members, they've been often neglected. And I'm glad that, with a turn of events, the things are being acknowledged and celebrated more and more and more because they need to be. And your poems beautifully describe that sense of back from war, being able to, they should be proud. They should be able to walk into a hotel, but instead the sign says whites only.
Right. My father joked in that way that Black people joke, which is to say darkly, how much he loved the war. He loved World War II. Even though he was shot at, even though he helped to liberate a camp, all of these things. What he said is that he never felt like such a human being before. He got to walk on the sidewalk. Nobody terrorized him. He had a girlfriend, a German girlfriend. Nobody terrorized him, and he said that America, like out of wartime, was worse than Europe during wartime as a Black man.
Wow. I want to call to this line, and if it can be of the earth, the body ponders, might such a landscape exist also within me? And it's so beautiful, but it makes me think of what you're just describing with your father, this idea of liberation and freedom that can exist when you leave the soil of America and go elsewhere, and you get to consider your Blackness in a different context. So much of your work and Kevin's work live in this space of Black liberation and reimagining and freedom. I have so many questions, but I think we should just start there. When you are creating a body of work, when you are thinking about Black liberation, is it something that comes seamlessly to you? Do you know from the beginning that is what you want to create? As you said, these two poems were mirrored next to each other. When you were putting this together, did you know that this is how it was going to come to form?
No, no. First of all, I want to back up a little bit and say partly why I'm even sitting here is because of Kevin Young. And I don't even know if Kevin knows this. I mean, Kevin and I are friends, and over the years, we've become better friends. But before we ever met, I remember I had a really bad accident, which I'm sure people know about. So, and I was in traction for a long time and couldn't walk, couldn't really talk. And my wife at the time, God rest her soul, brought me Kevin's books. I wasn't a poet. I wasn't thinking about writing nothing. And she brought me Kevin's books, and I was like in traction, like reading this guy going, who is he? What is this? I didn't know. Like, I was like, I didn't know you could do this in a poetry manuscript, which is to say, I didn't know you could have such deeply researched, such deeply political, such deeply philosophical, existential kind of representations and celebrations and engagements and explorations happening simultaneously on the page. Right. And in one poem. I didn't know that. And Kevin, I've never told you this, I don't think, but you know, I have more Kevin Young stories of things he did. Voyage wouldn't even be Voyage were it not for him, because I was going to go with another book, and we just happened to bump into each other at a conference. And he was like, I was like, no, I'm going to send in Knopf this manuscript. And he was, and I think you could tell, Kevin, that I was like, it was safer. It was a safer manuscript. And he said to me, no. And I think of it every day. He's in my head all the time. He said, no, go bold. Go bold. And Kevin's work for me is that boldness, you know? So anyway, I'm here because Kevin Young has, in his little way, said things to me or done things that,
but she, of course, wrote this beautiful book, and she
still
describing it to me. I was like, "I'm sorry, I have to read that book. You know, you can't keep that from us." That's what I'm saying to her about her next books, which are all going to be amazing too. And so, whenever I see Robin's poems, whether it's the New Yorker, or, here or there, I put one of her new poems in the African American Poetry Anthology that I just did, that we read together. We were commissioned to do work, and she, of course, you know, I wrote some bad poems, or I don't know what I did, and Robin wrote a poem about Lucy Terry, who some would say is the first African-American poet. She composed Bars Fight Orally, and she doesn't start my anthology because it wasn't printed till later, but she, you know, instead of talking about Lucy Terry, she just recreates her shopping list for her wedding day. And I think that's the kind of thing that Robin does. And so we're talking about liberation. That was your original question. And to me, it's an everyday thing, you know, and that poem that Robin did speaks to that. But Voyage of the Sable Venus also does that in a different way. It's trying to talk about what's found, what's already there. And so to me, there's many parts of that book, but that long poem by that name is, you know, recreating and sampling and a found poem using the language of art labels, of the narratives that that museums, European museums and American, placed on Black figures, you know, Black faces, Black stories. And to me, there's a clearing of the decks by that poem. I mean, I think that's true for American poetry. I think it really changed how people did erasure or found work, which had a kind of, I don't know, I always think it's radical and important and powerful, Zong being one of the big examples. But I think that Voyage of Sable Venus takes a voyage for us and brings us to this sort of present moment in a way that's really exciting. And so I think that's one idea of liberation. But, you know, there's also talking about pleasure. And I think, you know, we're both interested in that in different ways. You have to, I think. You know, poets get together and they don't usually talk about oppression or even poetry. They talk about music. They, you know, maybe have a drink. You know, they eat and, you know, they share. You know, and break bread in a kind of bigger way. And doing this anthology, I saw sort of the ways that people approached in very different ways in some way, but in another way, having a long conversation about what freedom means, you know, and it doesn't mean one thing. And in fact, freedom insists on many different things. And I think a lot about Toni Morrison's quote that the point of freedom is to free someone else. And I think that that's what a good poem does, is it provides you this idea of what you could do. And I don't just mean like in your life, though I think that's perhaps ultimately the goal, but also in a poem, you know, in language, in a moment. And we keep that with us.
Oh, I love that. That's the perfect transition to my next question. Because I've been thinking so much about language. You know, we have the call Black Lives Matter. And in this safe space, we know that is undeniable. Black Lives Matter. That isn't a question, but other people may question that. You know, there is such a thing of public vocabularies. And when it comes to protest and response, what do you think what is like the role of language when it comes to this? And how can it influence public conversations? We're having this conversation here, everyone is watching, and hopefully they're also reading the books and, you know, doing the inquiry that's necessary to have a deeper understanding. But how can we shape public conversations so people can be more, and I don't want to like say politically active, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but they can just be mindful of how they move in the world and move with intention. Maybe Robin, if you want to possibly take that one first.
I thought Kevin was gonna go. Okay, hopefully, I'm writing something down that you just said. So I think I'm so happy. I'm always happy to have Toni Morrison brought into any room. And I'm so happy you said that quote, Kevin. One of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to your question is in Toni Morrison's acceptance speech for her Nobel, where she said, you know, human beings, we do language, right? That's what we do. Without, you know, my next book is about a lot of things, but one of the things is about is the evolution of human beings and what distinguishes us from other species, other mammals, and it's language. Other animals, whatever, they communicate, but we took it to another whole other level. And so for me, you know, I'm always just kind of in this weird place about language. Like for me, I'm really moved that the young woman who, when she was getting arrested, was singing and dancing, "Y'all about to lose your job." I mean, you know, and that has become a slogan of Black liberation right now, and especially in this election, right? People all over, young woman's song who was being arrested and cuffed by the police, "You about to lose your job." I mean, just her veracity, right? Just like, yes, you're arresting me, but trust me, right? There will be vindication for the wrongness of this. So I don't really know how to answer your question, Glory, because I think it's so huge because it's language, and language is what like we've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, and more sincerely in the last, say, 40, 60,000 years. But I do think that we can't do what we're doing without language. There's no way. There's just no way.
Right.
Well, I think riffing off that, I love what you said. I mean, you know, just thinking about our 400 years on this continent, on this country, this nation, you know, I think a lot about how there isn't English without Black English. And Baldwin's great quote where he says, you know, if Black language, I think is the title of the article he's published was, if Black English isn't a language, what is, you know? And I think that kind of complication and pleasure, which I think are part of African-American vernacular English, obviously makes its way into poetry. It has to. And even if it's just an approach, even if it's just willingness to break language in order to find out what's in it. I think that's one of the things that Black poets do. I was really struck, of course, this summer when I was finishing the anthology. Was mostly done, but I was finishing my introduction, and I was struck by how many people were writing about these kinds of struggles all along. Certainly Emmett Till is one of the through lines in the book. I have a poem for him in there, but there were many, many more. I mean, that are both in the book. Gwendolyn Brooks is coming to the front of mind, but there are many more that could have been. And what's amazing about that to me is it resonates with now. And the reason that poets are reaching for Emmett Till is both because of the transformative nature of his mother, Mamie Till, insisting that his body be seen, but also the way that poets are making connections, making metaphor between now and the kinds of struggles we're still in, I think is really important. Poetry, of course, doesn't always tell you. Sometimes it's placing these two things beside each other and saying, look, they are alike. They are. We do language, you know, and I think that quality, I find jumps off the page. You know, there was a time when I thought, well, maybe we should have illustrations, not like pictures of what the poem's picture, but just even photographs or time frames or images of some of these poets. And then the fact that it's all words, but it's filled with images, seems to me to be the important thing. And, you know, I think understanding the Black aesthetic and its manifold qualities is one of the qualities of liberation and of the language that now is public. I think that's a good way to think of it.
Yes.
Can I
just come in really quickly, Glory, just respond to what Kevin just said? Yes, all of that. Thank you. And I was reminded, listening to you, Kevin, about what you just said about there's so many freedoms. I was thinking there's so many Englishes on the globe, but also within the United States. Kevin and I both, our families both hail from Louisiana. And I remember going back to Louisiana all the time and going, what are they saying? Right? I don't understand. And it would take me like about a week to go. And then I was, you know, and I couldn't.
Like 2 hours, and I'm pretty soon I'm like, you know, asking for crackling in the proper accent, you know what
exactly.
I mean?
But then, you know, I went on to study Sanskrit and linguistics and all that, and I began to understand, oh my God, it's French diction applied to English. Oh my God, it's colonialism. Why we say, you know, want to go to the store with me? Yeah, is because it's French diction. And it's probably some Bambara stuff thrown in there too, just for good measure. There's no coincidence that the word for gumbo, the word for okra in Senegal is gumbo. And we all know that, you know, from Senegal, the French brought so many slaves from Senegal into Louisiana. So I just wanted to just point out that there's so many Black Englishes the same way, even in this landmass. I'm not even talking about the around the world. That just quadruples it.
You're right. Plural is the best way to put it. But right. I think it's useful to, and you know, one of the things I ended up doing in the anthology is including the earliest anthology of African-American poetry, which is from 1845, Les Senelles, which is Creole French-speaking poets writing in French. But it was the work was translated by Langston Hughes and others. And I think that was really important to show this continuity and to show there are other languages that we are fluent in, and some of them are subterranean and come to the surface in poems.
Absolutely, I cannot believe you. This is the book I was going to say I was reading, but Kevin, we haven't talked. I actually have a chapter on Les Senelles in my dissertation. It's one of my favorite things that has ever been made in history. And it's so, see why I love him so much? Do you see why I love him so much? Like most people, you have to be a real Black poet, geek head in the archives, not coming up for centuries to know about Les Senelles, and he put it in this. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. You're crazy. I love you so much. Well, yes, but I wasn't offering that as a corrective. The whole thing about English as being
no. Yeah,
I wanted to tie it into Glory, your question about freedom and liberation. That there's so many different ways. There's so many different avenues. And I think we get really, we can limit ourselves when we think of them singularly as opposed to plural. Is that a word? Plural?
Yeah.
Anyway, if you say it, it's a word.
Yeah, simultaneity, that's my thing, simultaneity.
this weekend at the virtual Well Read Black Girl Festival, we were talking about time and lineage and the fact that Black culture works in a space that is unmovable. And the reason, there's CP time is because, the rules don't apply to us, And we had an awesome conversation with like Nikki Giovanni, and of course she talked about space and Mars. It just was, just so,
fantastic.
so awesome. But I think where I'm going with that is like this idea of time. So as I was going through your book, Kevin, this is really a capstone. Like this needs to be on everyone's shelf. Yes. And even the title of it, the fact that you put struggle and song, and the reality, which brings me to my next question. The reality is that even though we encounter so much oppression, so much struggle, the fact that we can still be joyous and full of song and hope. And I've been doing my best to really think about the goals for my life in generations and decades versus just like a year, 5 years. I've been trying to think like so future forward that I know that I will not see the results, but my children's. I've been trying my best to really think future forward. And this book gives me that, but also gives me a beautiful connection to the past. So again, the joy, how do we as Black people stay in political joy despite the things that we face that should tear us down, that should stop us in our tracks, but instead we keep with the struggle and the song simultaneously?
Go ahead, Glory. Ask the right questions, girl.
Yeah, Glory. Easy. Let's just solve it right now. Let's do it. We got a few minutes. Let's solve Black oppression. No, I think that it's very important. And I think it's a real shift in the conversation. And Robin is really great at reminding us. Just when I hear her talk, she's always good at reminding us about joy, about pleasure, about the radical nature of those things. Rest, I think, especially during quarantine, you'd think you could rest easily. I sleep terribly, so like how do you kind of return to these things that I think are radical in their diversion from or diverting from some of the master narratives, let's call them. For me, I think always of Lucille Clifton. Now we could just end the sentence there. But I think of her in terms of joy, because she signed her books always joy and exclamation point. And I always knew instinctively, but then the more I read about her and I edited collected poems by her, and there's a new wonderful selected poems, that was a hard-won thing. Joy was like, something she was like jazz. It was like improvisational. It was achieved. It might look like it just is off the cuff, but it requires study and intent, a word you used earlier. And I think that's part of it, survival. Her most famous poem, of course, Won't You Celebrate With Me? And I think that is a really important poem, that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. But she's talking about the celebration part. Doesn't mean she's just forgotten that. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about how she was able to name herself and then rename her struggle as celebration. And so it's an active process. And what I don't want people to think is, well, if I don't feel joyous, somehow I'm not being revolutionary, which would be the exact wrong thing. It's more that, let's think about how those small pleasures, a meal, a shared moment with a loved one, especially now when we're all disconnected and literally, and you can't see your mama at Thanksgiving and, this, that, and the other. How do we, find those little moments of connection with others, but also with ourselves? And poetry is one of those bridges. It's one of those places where you can land in a light. And I think that's really radical and revolutionary. And you can forget, you can forget to eat, you can forget to sleep. And I think that especially that idea, again, Toni Morrison's, that, distraction is one of the real purposes of racism, to distract you from your self-care and your self-love and all these other things, and spend time disproving stuff you don't need to disprove or prove your humanity. You need to enjoy it. And I'm saying this as much to myself as anything else. You have to remind yourself. But that hard-won joy, I think, is part of our inheritance. It's part of the blues. It's part of poetry. It's part of you and I. And let's keep returning to it.
Thank you for that. I love the fact that you said the joy, it's like jazz, it can be improvised, because that is a real thing. I think about, folks that were standing in line for hours trying to vote, but then broke out into the electric slide.
I know.
It's like,
and good too, not just like, like tearing it up.
Right. It's just like we can find that levity when we need to, but we can also there's not a difference in the being an activist, being an organizer, and you don't have to be stone-faced to do it. You can actually smile. And like one of my favorite writers and just professors is Professor Roberts, Dorothy Roberts. And I remember like reading her book and being so just engrossed in like thinking like, how am I going to change the world? And then talking to her and being like, I'm going to go off and bake some cupcakes. And I was like, you know what? If this lady can, do all the things that she does on a daily basis and be a lawyer and be a professor and fight for like reproductive justice and also bake cupcakes, I can do that too. Like there's no one or the other. And that's a silly example, but it just shows that like we have multitudes.
It's not silly. It's not silly. I mean, I have so many. First of all, I'm sitting here going, so to the audience, Kevin was throwing me a little shade before we come on live because we've been playing phone tag. But what I need to say to you live, my love, is you have to get ready to talk to you. You can't just like casually call you up. And your answer just now about joy is a perfect example why I'm sitting here going, okay, you cannot cry right now. You cannot cry. I mean, whenever we hang out, I'm always like, I have to prepare for you, Kevin. So what you just said was profound. I just want to add a few things, if I may. I was thinking this weekend a lot about Black joy because of I was on social media and I came across a few posts where people were shaming people for being happy about the election. I mean, profound shame. Like, you don't know, and all this, like, I'm going to try to be respectful. They were shaming people for being ecstatic that Donald Trump had been voting out of the White House. And I was so deeply wounded by that, because what I thought about was Luso Clifton's poem, but also Toy Derricott's poem. Toy has this poem, I can't remember, Kevin could quote it, I can't, where it's one of her shorter poems, and she was like, basically, if enslaved women could sing songs, bake cupcakes, she didn't do that, but I'm using your analogy, Glory, and make pies, create filet gumbo, right? All these other things, basically, Toy, shut up, right? I think about joy as a very complex technology. It is not for the faint of heart. Not many people can pull it off. You can't find joy in hell easily. And the fact that Black people have done it for generations and generations and generations, it's our magic power. It really is. I'm thinking again about Robin Kelly's book, Hammer and Hoe, and what an incredible corrective that was when that book came out. I don't know, 80s, 90s, I don't remember, right? Because at the time, people were like, so like using Marxist theory, and I love Marx, so I'm not trying to put him down, but they were dismissing Black people in the South because they were religious, right? They were like, well, we can't really take them seriously because they're religious, they have faith, right? And came in and did this incredible corrective about how, you have these organizing meetings taking place in churches after Sunday school, right? That kind of thing. And I just keep thinking about the marriage of joy and liberation, the marriage of ecstasy, the marriage of dancing, the marriage of singing and fighting, right? I saw those videos too. And I just think that, in order to be happy, in order to feel pleasure, in order to feel joy, I want to see how many people can actually pull it off. It's not an easy thing. Anybody who's been depressed knows that. Right. And we have a lot to be depressed about. Right. Anybody who's been in despair knows that to crawl out of despair is an arduous task that takes sometimes years, sometimes lifetimes. So the fact that Black people have found some, I don't even know, street, right, path into pleasure, even in hell, is a profound kind of, it's just evidentiary in terms of liberation, right? Like I love my grandmother used to say, get back Satan, or my sister tells me now, don't let the enemy in, right? Anytime I say something that like, rah, she's like, Robin, that's just the enemy, let's move on, right? And it's been so lovely because I'm like, oh, right. All right. I forgot that deep Black training that we don't talk enough about. That's like, no, we don't need to talk about what? No.
Right. There's a way in which there's a notion, and I think sometimes people mistook this in their own writing, that we were talking about the man all the time, or whatever you think, whatever you think the man is. And the truth is, like I said, folks are talking often about pleasure, about their next meal, about how the meal they just had, about the thing they're going to go to, about church service, you know.
Yeah.
And to me, there's that liberation theology that the enslaved Africans created and brought with them, and transplanted and grew like gumbo, like okra in this soil, and made, you know, taller, better, and taste good, you know. And now, like, I don't know, I think that's really important to talk about. Even as we say, making gumbo is hard. You know, it is not easy to do right. And that's why I only eat it in my mama's house, really. I might have Dawkins if she makes a good gumbo, which I haven't had the pleasure. I would. That's right. But you gotta make some choices, and I think joy is like that too. You have to. It's a combination of things. Everyone's is different, and you got to find it and then try to perfect it. And it might take a lifetime.
Yeah, it's deeply philosophical. It's an existentialist quest, right? You know, my sister and I are 5 years apart, and we're aging. And every time we have a little new wrinkle, she says, "Consider the alternative," and then we just start laughing, right? We could be dead, or we could have another wrinkle. Which do you want, right? Yeah. And it's just amazing to me. It sounds like so simple.
I'm sorry. This is some, you know, I don't see it, but sure.
But it sounds so simple, right? We can joke about it. I mean, you know, that's what true comedy is too. Think about Richard Pryor, one of my favorite critics of American race who's ever lived. Richard Pryor. Think about his comedy. His comedy is so complex.
Yeah.
Right? It makes me think of the new Claudia Rankin book, where with the epigraph is about the Richard Pryor joke. There's no.
Oh, I haven't read it yet.
Oh my God! Yeah, well, so the epigraph, it talks about the joke he made. The book is called Just Us, and so it's like, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't want to mess up the joke, but you know, in prison there's no justice. There's only just us.
Oh yes, so, exactly.
Yeah, I mean it's funnier when Richard Pryor says it. Obviously.
Yeah, no. To the audience, do yourselves a favor. Live on the Sunset Strip.
Sure.
It's one. People go, "What are your influences?" I'm like, Richard Pryor.
Exactly.
One of my favorite essays is the Hilton Atlas essay on Richard Pryor in White Girls. Oh, like.
Oh yeah, sure.
So good.
We can sing our praises all night. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I sing mine for Robin and for you, Glory. I'm so happy to be on this with you, and I know that folks out there are, you know, because one of the things we're talking about, one of the pleasures that I don't think gets talked about a lot, and I've been thinking about a lot, and I know you all already are, is Black reading and reading by Black folks. You know, what a revolutionary act writing, of course, is, and that's something I talk about in the anthology, but, you know, so is reading. And, you know, Black women like buy the most books per capita. They're very well-read. They are folks who want that information. They write, I mean, you know, and to think that sometimes that's not understood or ignored is zany to me.
Yeah.
So the pleasure of reading, I think, is one we should at least shout out.
It's a profound point you're making.
So I do want to make some time for, because we're getting close to time, but I want to make some time for questions. So I see a couple of people have like put something in the Q&A box. Okay, let's see here. There's awesome comments in here. Thank you, Ms. Coste Lewis. Thank you for acknowledging Black librarians. So we just want to give you a shout out for that. It also looks, sorry guys, I'm like trying to read and be, with Kevin being named as the new director, has this appointment caused either of you to think about poetry, both as practice in your own work and the ways in which poems can bring other art forms to life and vice versa, especially in the context of creating lasting conversations between Black art forms? And this question is also in the Q&A if you want to read it directly in process.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to I know we keep holding up this book, but we keep holding up this book for a very good reason. Yes, Kevin edited it. When he found the time to do this and be the director of Schomburg, and now he's the director of this other museum and write his poems and be the editor of the New Yorker and his amazing books, I don't know, but look at this book, you guys.
It really
guys,
is.
an anthology is a very big deal. It's a very big deal. And Kevin, I was going to ask you, I meant to ask before we got on, when was the last Black survey anthology this big done? It has to be decades, yeah?
I don't know. I mean, there are ones I looked at a lot. There's obviously Michael S. Harper's African-American poetry with Anthony Walton, that comes to mind.
Right, is that the last one though, before this one? I can't remember. Regardless, I'm just saying.
That it lasts, you know, and at a certain point, I was trying to go back to the writers themselves. But
yeah.
I think a lot about Langston Hughes's Poetry of the Negro.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
2 editions, and you know, there's some really hard to find writers in there who never published a book, and that always interests me too. Is the people who wrote terrific poems, many of them in the Harlem Renaissance, who didn't end up publishing a book.
Exactly.
I do want to touch on real quick on that question, just because I think both Robin and I have written about art so much, visual art. Yeah. And to me, that's one way that poetry is really interesting. When I was writing poems about Basquiat, for instance, I knew that I didn't want to illustrate these great paintings. It would be strange, you know. Instead, I wanted to kind of enact them or provide the experience, and like help people see them how I saw them or heard them almost. And so there was that for me. But as a director, you know, I'm really looking forward to the ways that it's not just art, but it's history. I mean, I love the name of the museum, History and Culture. That, you know, it both acknowledges those things are joined and also how they are sort of the same, but also slightly different, and the ways that the story of African-American culture and history is an American story. And to me, African-American art, which has never been hotter than right now, is a big part of that story. It's what I collect. And have for a long time, just personally. But you know, now it's really wild to see people just doing so well with it. Someone like Basquiat, I remember when, you know, one could have maybe bought one piece of something of his, and now you can't. But the mark is not the only measure, of course. There's all these creating that's happening. And I think what the museum does well is really frame that creating in the history, much like we're talking about. You know, there is this long conversation being had in these different art forms, and you know, no one space can hold them all, but the museum does a really great job, I think, of conveying the scope of it. And I'm looking forward to kind of digging in and seeing what corners we can light and shine a bright spotlight on.
Okay, but I want to back up. I'm sorry. Whatever for you. Yes, that was brilliant. But this is extraordinary. This is extraordinary.
Thank you very much.
When you think about how many people aren't actually reading now, right? Yes, Black women, in addition to rescuing the Democratic Party every election, we also rescue the public. We read. We're huge readers. But that said, you know, this book, the importance of this book, and now in this historical time, and the new poets who are in here. I just think about, I remember picking up that Langston Hughes Arna Bontemps anthology. I also wrote a chapter in my dissertation later, but as a child, I remember finding it in my parents' library, and it was a whole world. It was a whole world that I didn't know. And so I think about this, Kevin, within that context of like our sons. Kevin and our sons are similar in age, or they're whatever, you know, 20-year-olds, college students. I can't wait to teach this, right? To go here. You know, people always ask, like, will you come and talk about race? Will you come and talk about whatever? And it's like, will you read this first? Read this first. And then we'll talk. Then we'll talk. Right? So I'm sorry. I am so in love with this, Kevin, and I'm so grateful that somehow you managed to do this too. I'm not trying to brown nose with Kevin at all, you guys. I love anthologies. I write about anthologies, the history of Black poetry anthologies. This is extraordinary. Okay, sorry, Glory.
You hear the book that we need to have from her, right? You heard that, right? That part too? Like, when's that book out? Like, You know,
I know. I have a whole stack. I have a whole stack.
Yeah. See,
They're coming. They're coming. I promise.
I'm sure there's books in there. We have to ask.
Tomorrow's my last day of teaching for at least a year, if not 2 years, and I have drafts and stacked right here, and it's on. It's on. It's on.
I'll be over in like an hour, and I'm just gonna. The archive side of me just is eager to see it.
Oh, Kevin, we have to talk actually, because you know I throw everything away. It drives them crazy. Anyway.
I am so in love with this, like this love. It just feels like I'm watching like the group text. Like this is so good. I feel like I have a better insight in both of your.
He's my boo. He's my boo. Yeah, my baby. I'm such a fan. Deep admiration.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anything else the audience asks? I don't want to.
Oh yeah, we do have some more. We have a great question, and this is, I'm going to add to it, but this is an incredible question from Candace. As a poet, what is your relationship with Black music as a source of inspiration? Poetically, what are your favorite musical works? So I would love to hear what you're listening to as well. Like what inspires you when it comes to music? And do you either one of you play instruments or sing at all? I'm just curious.
Do you want to go, Kevin? Or you want me to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually sitting on a piano. I mean, my computer's on a piano, but I don't play it. So, I took lessons once upon a time, but no is the short answer to that. I think in a way that's what I grew up with music. My dad was a big music head. I went to church and heard music there with my mom, and I think it comes across in my poems. Certainly, some of my heroes are there, whether it's James Brown or I edited a blues poems anthology, and a jazz poems anthology. So I'm constantly dancing with music, as it were. And I especially used to write with music. I still do, but it was very much part of my practice. And I couldn't have written the Gray album without making, just endless playlists, which is a book of nonfiction, from hip hop to whatever. And often it's not the music I'm writing about or writing through. Mm-hmm. So for me, music is central. But I would expand from Candace. It's good to see Candace asking questions. And I would expand from that to say, to me, a poem is a piece of music in the sense that it isn't an idea, it is a piece of sound created. So that musical quality almost comes first when we're talking about language. And I've taken so much of that from music, and jazz, of course, inspires me in the way that I don't, you have to be part of that process. And so I think what Robin does, for instance, too, is recreate that process on the page. So like, I kind of love a little rougher kind of at the end version. It doesn't have to be completely smoothed over, or I like it to have a little hint of what made it. And I remember when I was writing a poem, this last thing I'll say, after my father died, I wrote a series of poems that eventually became Book of Hours. And I had a poem called Bereavement, and there's a kind of joke in the middle of it. And it's a very serious poem. And I thought, well, I can't have that joke. And I was like, wait, but that, it almost goes back to that joy thing we were talking about before. I was like, that was truer to the experience. The kind of grim humor, the darkly, as you said, humor was sort of part of that feeling. And so I left it in, and I'm glad I did. It is sometimes the only joke that happens if I read from that book. But it's a moment of I think, humanity, because sometimes we get so formal or, around grief or around, propriety. And I want to let a little light in there in all senses. So.
That's great. You want to answer as well, Robin?
I think Kevin answered it for both of us mostly. The only thing I would say is, again, Louisiana, the blues. Robert Haas said this amazing thing in his book on haiku. He said the closest you can get to a haiku in English is the blues. And I love that he said that, because I knew exactly what he meant. It's really about silence. It's about the end of the line. And I also love what Kevin said, that poetry is a musical art. I think of it that way. I change words because of the sound that they make, not because of the meaning, often. But what kind of music I listen to? Everything, absolutely everything. Jazz is really, really important to me. I have a deep obsession with the trinity of, well, there's more than a trinity, but Shirley Horn, Betty Carter, Carmen McRae, Abby Lincoln, all of them, because I'm listening to how they're enunciating. I'm listening to the syncopation. I'm listening to how Shirley Horn can drag out a meter like a long time, and that's fascinating to me in terms of a stanza say. It's like, no, like the poem I read tonight, from Two. Like, you can have a sentence go on for 10 lines, 12 lines. I learned a lot from jazz about, how to do that from jazz, or whatever. But, I really also really like opera and black sopranos. I listen to opera a lot because here's the thing I tell my students all the time: we're going to die. And opera gets me there like that, like, stop messing around. Do you want to write something for real, or do you want to play around on the page? And there's nothing wrong with playing around on the page, but like, it makes me value what I do as a job, as an artist. It makes me go, okay. So I listen to a lot of opera because it kind of, speaking to Claudia Rankin, Claudia told me this great story once, and this is what opera does for me. Claudia says that people don't realize it, but she likes to write things in sonnets to clear away all the trash. And then once it's all done, she'll put it back into a paragraph. I feel that way about opera. Opera clears the way for me. It's like, yeah, get to those real emotions, get to those real stories, and stop wasting your reader's time. Don't waste the reader's time. Like, what will get me there quickly? That's what I'm trying to do.
I love that, because what you're saying essentially is precision, that like, you get there and that urgency to get the feeling. And I don't know what it's called, but when you hear a good song, like you're in church, or like you hear a song that reminds you of a memory and you get that chill, like, that tingle, like I love that feeling, because it's like, your heart is feeling it too,
Yes, totally.
That's totally so good. Now I'm gonna listen to more opera, like Black opera now. Like I feel like that isn't something I've done consistently, and I'm like so intrigued. I want to do that. So okay. I know we're almost at time, but I want to try to get in. Hopefully I can get in like 2 more questions. Sure. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, so Lee says, it's so wonderful to hear such thoughtful and well-informed speakers. Thanks to you all. What strikes me most is the joy you express at being in one another's presence. Can you talk about the difficulties in bringing that joy into classes, committee meetings, editorial conferences, and the rest of your life? Like, to summarize, how do you bring that energy that we're able to witness now into your everyday? And it seems like, especially when it comes to, classroom settings where you have to be in front of a large group of people.
Well, I love what Kevin just said about how when poets are together, we don't talk about half the stuff that, we get some liquor and we have some real talks. Like, in fact, you talked about the Langston Hughes poem about Let America Be Great Again. And I was thinking, what I love about that poem, I love so much about that poem. But one of the things I love about that poem is that the parenthetical statements that he makes after a couple of stanzas, the rhyme is A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, whatever it is. And then the statement, America was never, all the stuff that he's just said, America was never that. And the reason, when you asked us to look at it, I was like, I can't wait to talk to Kevin about this, right? Because the reason why the parenthetical statement really cuts is because of the scheme that precedes it. Every single time it's like sing-songy. The rhymes are like la, 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 right? And then ta-da. No, it's not that. Right. And so anyway, it's a very geeky thing to want to talk to somebody about, but it is what I wanted to talk about. I just decided to pretend this is what I do in terms of my profession as a teacher and a poet laureate. I pretend that house music is on at all times in the background. Oh yeah, to the question about music, I'm a big house head. So I also dance hard to house music any chance I get alone.
Are you putting baby powder on the floor?
Totally, tambourine, whistles, I have the whole thing. So I'm still a big house head, so that helps me. But I pretend that house music is on, and I just pretend like the people I have to talk to are as smart and intelligent as Kevin Young, and all those things. I just assume that the bar is high, and also that the energy is generous. And if I do that, it creates a avenue of authenticity for me, so that I don't have to go in performing. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to do anything. I could just be who I am, straight up. And that's been really helpful.
That is wonderful advice. That is such wonderful advice. I try to do that same, being my 100% self in every situation and just being transparent, especially when I may not know the answer to things. I'm like, okay, we'll figure this out together. So that space of generosity, people tend to replicate it if they feel, they feel like this is a trusting, safe environment. That's like the best advice. Thank you for that.
I also, I'm sorry, I refuse to tap dance. I refuse to play the minstrel in any meeting. I will not be the whatever. No. Anyway.
Would you like to add to that, Kevin? I see you talking.
She said what I would have wanted to say, only better. So.
Okay, I'm going to, I did have one question, just because so much is happening. This is a conversation about, race and culture and what's happening currently in the political moment. And thank you for bringing up the Langston Hughes poem. I got so excited that that was supposed to be our opening poem. But I wanted to just touch on, the news cycle, 24 hours, everything is happening so quickly. In the last 24 hours, has anything you've seen given you hope or given you pause? And with everything happening, if there was just one, just drill down statement on how to just move forward, because I just feel like everyone's very tense and like, okay, are we gonna have a coup in 2 seconds? Like, what is happening? Well, what is like giving you hope and joy in this crazy moment?
Wow.
I know it's a lot, but take your time. We're gonna close out strong.
I mean, I think it's hard to remember sometimes where north is, and I mean that in the sort of symbolic sense, the true north, where one's own compass is. And I find that it's a mix for me of remembering things long before, and sometimes that can be bittersweet, remembering when Robin and I could hug and laugh and toast in person. It's been a long time, and it might be much longer. I had a big birthday recently, and I was thinking so much about all my friends who I couldn't see, who I couldn't, even in the same city, and so I think what that can do is help you just appreciate what you do got. And so for me, that's some of what I think is the key. I do get, like everyone, lost in the news cycle. Doom scrolling is a real thing. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I can hear the rain. I can take that walk, I can safely, of course. I can, my son's making dinner, while we're talking. And it's like, those are amazing things that have happened since quarantine. He became an amazing cook. And it's very good. I if you can do it, Robin, I suggest try it. And one of the things he did just is he cooked with his grandmother, my mom, and so that was amazing to see. And now he has these recipes that he got much easier than I can get them, and so to me, I think in the big picture, and trying to, it's almost, in the past 24 hours, there isn't going to be something that's in that. To me, it's thinking that long picture, taking the long view. And, I think whenever I see people be kind, which doesn't happen enough online, I think I try to take note of it.
What do you think?
Yeah, I would add to that. I can't wait to eat your kids' food. Oh, should I not add? Should I add or not add? I saw someone else come back online.
Okay, that's just me. Before I give you a conclusion, you guys can talk for a little bit.
Okay, a couple of things. One is historical precedent gets me through. Like we've been through so much for so many centuries that one little man doesn't bother me at all, not at all. I don't understand. I am not gonna get my knickers tied in a knot for him. It's a distraction. I love that you brought up Toni Morrison, Kevin. We have gotten through so much, and this is a blip on the screen. It's a blip on the screen. So I just try to not doom scroll. I have a really bad habit. I delete Instagram about once a week and put my phone down in a drawer and I pick it up a week later. That's been helpful, that kind of stuff. I also want to talk about just Fanon's idea that, you know, attention, that our attention has been colonized. That's the side of colonization. Our minds are the side of colonization. And so the moment we can stop paying attention to the distraction and pay attention to the joy and the importance, then I think we can get more places. So I see hope all the time, you know. Also, I'm in California, so there are hummingbirds outside my window at all times. That's easy.
Yeah, quarantine. Do you ever see that video of quarantine, like on the East Coast and quarantine in California?
No, you have to send it to
hot
me.
tub, like, oh, gee, I think I'll take
Totally.
a hike. Oh, it's not so bad. You know, I was in Harlem, yo. It was like,
Yeah. Yeah, I also, you know, I don't think quarantine's so bad for me because I'm at my mom's house and I pimped out the tool shed into a little studio and I'm in an all Black middle class neighborhood right on the border of Compton, and you walk around, everybody's like, hey. I mean,
that is the wonderful thing. Like being in Harlem during quarantine gave me, I can look out, it's beautiful. Don't tell everybody, but it's beautiful up down. And you know, you can walk around, like you said, get anything, anywhere. And you know, I just hope that the next phase we're able to kind of survive and come through safely and things don't creep back up.
I think we'll be fine. I think we just are gonna have to deal with the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But that, you know, this summer, okay, this is a great note to end on. This summer and watching all the people protesting in the streets, I can't tell you, some part of my psyche that's like a million-year-old hag finally was like, okay, I can take a nap. I'm gonna go to sleep now. They got it. They got it. It's cool. We're good. So I'm kind of like, I'm not worried. It's like, if you try anything else, I know that those millions and millions of people will come back to the streets and say no. I felt profoundly faithful about that. Those kids, I'm sorry, I'm totally waxing auntie. Those kids just moved me deeply. Oh, I mean, I was just like, all the ancestors were celebrating. It was extraordinary. So, you know, he could try it, but you know, it's us. Speaking of just us, it's a different just us. Like, you know, don't mess with us. Don't mess with us.
That is the perfect, yes, justice. Yes, just us. Let's do it. That is the perfect way to close this amazing conversation. Thank you for just showing up at your full, beautiful selves. Thank you for your work.
Glory. Thank you.
Please purchase these books. We are doing nameplates, I believe, that you can get it. The book signs, am I saying this right? Cafe de Libros? I cannot speak Spanish. I'm sorry, but there's an amazing indie bookstore that Jillian will tell us more about. Buy the book, support these incredible authors, poets. We are so thankful for you both.
Thank you so much, you guys.
This has been a bomb. I'm like, I feel so blessed. Thank you.
Let's talk soon, okay?
Yes,
I'm calling you right now.
All right.
We truly could not have asked to witness a more riveting, thought-provoking, joyful discussion on everything from crafting meaning through juxtaposition to Richard Pryor to house music on this Wednesday evening. Thank you guys so much, Glory, Robin, Kevin, and to everyone watching. You've been a very attentive, active audience. As a reminder, as Glory said, you can find these extraordinary writers' books and much more at Café con Libros website, which is cafeconlibrosbk.com, also in the chat. On behalf of Knopf Doubleday, thank you everyone and have a good night. Enjoy your son's cooking, Kevin.
Thank you.